Why did I end up not choosing to build a bike instead of building a bike like I initially intended to? When I first got back into mountain biking, I really wanted to build a bike. I love building things. It's just one of those things that I like to be able to hand pick every component and just be able to fine tune everything to fit my needs. But the problem was I didn't really know what my needs were. And so I just knew I needed to get a bike. I got my son a bike and I just need something to be able to go riding. So a friend hit me up. He was selling a 2014 Giant Trance 27.5, and that worked great for what I needed. I just needed something to go ride, but I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And it's been so long since I've actually ridden bikes that I didn't know what direction I wanted to go to. I'm 30 years old now, overweight, out of shape, and so I needed to realize, what do I want to focus on? Do I want it to hardtail cross country so I could really hit some trails and just go long distances and get back into shape? Or did I want an enduro bike that I could just point at anything and just hit trails as hard as I possibly can? Did I want something kind of more in between, a trail bike of some sort? There's so many different things I didn't know that I just was winging it at this point. So I picked up that 2014 Giant Trance, and that worked great. I mean, full suspension. It's a trail bike, so I figured that's a good starting point. It's right in the middle of big bike versus small bike. It's right in the middle. Trail bike, do everything. And I grew up riding all kinds of bikes. I grew up riding BMX. I rode cross country in high school. I rode dirt bikes a lot, so I'm very familiar with two wheels and kind of everything in between. But I just didn't know which direction I wanted to go. So I ended up trying a few different bikes, mostly enduro bikes, just because that's what I borrowed from a friend. I went to Sky Park a couple times, rented some bikes. And what I ended up realizing is I wanted something a little bit lighter and a little bit more playful. I didn't want to have some big heavy bike that I have to lug around on the uphills. If I'm not going to a bike park on a regular basis, then I don't need such a big, heavy, gnarly bike that I have to pedal up hills. If I'm going to be riding a bike to get back in shape, I'm not that good a shape. I need to be able to have a bike that I can actually ride decent amount of distances. I'm not lugging around some big heavy bike. But I still wanted to stick with my roots of, going higher speeds, pushing my limits, riding the big choppy trails, and just playful riding in general. So yeah, an enduro bike was just too much for me. I'm not going to get very far on one of those. And a hardtail, obviously, that's not going to be able to get me where I want to be when it comes to pushing limits and such. So after I, rented some bikes, borrowed some bikes, rode enough on that Trance, I realized a couple things. So number one, couldn't do a hardtail. Number two, I didn't want some big heavy bike. Number three, I didn't want big wheels. I didn't want a full 29er. I rode a Santa Cruz Bronson while I was at Sky Park, and I fell in love with that bike, actually. It was a 29er front, 27.5 rear. It was a mullet setup. It had big brakes. It had good suspension. Didn't have too much suspension. It still felt like a poppy, playful bike. It didn't feel like the YT Capra that I rode or the Mega Tower or whatever it was that I rode. And those seemed like just bigger bikes, and I wanted something a little bit more poppy and playful. So I just truly needed something that's just in between an enduro and a cross-country bike, and there we go. We're on a trail bike. And then I realized, wait, I have a trail bike. I have this Giant Trance. It's got 140 mil travel front and rear. It's not a super high travel trail bike, but it's a trail bike. And I'll just end up using that, and I'll build off of that. It gets me where I want to go. I'll just start upgrading the components that I want. So, I want to get Fox Grip 2 forks. I want to get Fox Flow X2 shock. I want to get some 4-piston brakes, 203 180 rotors front and rear. I wanted to get better wheels. I wanted to get higher engagement hub. So I wanted to do all these things, and I figured might as well start on the bike that I already have, and then I'll just at some point swap frames, get a common cell frame or a YT frame or something that I could find, and just build everything and then swap frames at some point in the future. So I started with building my bike. I started with what I thought was going to be the biggest game changer, which is a Fox 36 Grip 2 fork and new front wheel and new tires. And wow, that made a world of difference on that old bike. And so I got the bug. I am going to build this bike out, and it's going to be super badass, and then I'll just figure out, once I figure out which frame to go with, I'm going to get a new frame. And I decided to stick with 27.5, and not really 100% sure why, but I just kind of stuck with that. So now that I got the fork and all that where I want it to be, I figured, okay, what's the next biggest thing? The fork made a huge difference. Maybe a rear shock, maybe a rear wheel. So I started looking into, what options I have when it comes to a shock and a rear wheel. Well, I quickly realized I'm kind of stuck. I can't just keep upgrading this bike. And the reason being was the rear wheel it's a quick release rear end. It's not the boost that is standard these days. And so it had a 10 speed, a 2x10. I needed 11 or 12 speed. And I figured if I'm going to be upgrading things, well, I'm not going to put a bunch of money into a rear hub just so I can go 11 or 12 speed. I'm not going to buy new shifters and all that stuff around a setup that's not going to be worthwhile. I'm not going to put a nice hub on a quick release frame. And so I quickly realized I'm not going to put all this money into this frame. I can't get new cranksets. I mean, I can, but I'm not going to get new cranksets and new bearings and new hubs and new wheels and all this stuff when that stuff's not going to transfer over to the new bike that I want to build, which is going to be, a nicer frame. It's going to be a boost rear end. It's going to be 11 or 12 speed. It's going to be totally different components. And I'm not going to buy new shifters and derailleur and all that stuff for a bike that's not going to work. So that had me thinking, damn, did I already start putting money into a bike that is just not going to work for my needs? I need something that's I want an aggressive trail bike. I would like to have something that's not an enduro bike, but I also want something that I can push the limits of. And so I started going online, and I went on to Facebook Marketplace, and I started just looking for deals on anything that I could basically take that front end, the Grip 2 forks and the front wheel and the dropper post that I upgraded already, and I could just put it on there. And I found a 2018 YT JEFFSY Carbon Pro, and that fit my goals perfectly. When I was looking at reviews, the JEFFSY is a perfect playful bike. It's got 150 mil of travel front and rear, so it's an more aggressive trail bike. It's carbon, so it's super light, so which means pedal efficiency. It's got an 11-speed rear end. I could transfer the forks and because it came with Fox 34 forks, so I was able to swap over the Fox 36 Grip 2 forks and the new front wheel that I bought. It already came with Shimano XT components, which is what I was going to buy for my bike anyway. It does have SRAM brakes, which I'm still getting used to. Probably upgrade those at some point to Shimano XT brakes, 4-piston. It already has 4-piston, but it already has all the components I want and need. All I had to do is transfer over the parts that I already upgraded from the other bike. And now I'm selling the other bike, and I have this bike, and it's a world of difference. Holy crap. So that was basically the reason that I didn't end up building the bike like I planned. But doesn't really mean I'm not building a bike anymore. It just means that I have a new platform to build off of. So that's kind of what I'm going to be doing now, is I'm just going to upgrade the things that I feel is necessary. The bike already has most of the stuff I want. It has a Float X2 shock. It's got the Grip 2 forks that I had. It came with carbon bars, but I'll be switching those out. It came with 11-speed, XT components, carbon cranks. Like, it has everything. So there's not much more that I need to upgrade. It's going to be fine-tuning and just improving things, or when I break things, I'll just be, improving things at that time. So good news is I don't really have to build a bike. It already has all the things I want to do, and I just fine-tune it to where I want it to be. And so there you go. That is why I didn't end up building a bike like I planned. I still would love to build a bike. I still have plans to someday build a bike, but I kind of took the shortcut in a lot of ways, and I bought some components and transferred them over to a bike, and it's phenomenal, to say the least.